The biggest takeaway when I see people come to my events is kind of the broadening of their perspective, but they oftentimes don't know what they don't know. And so my job is not to scare them or elicit a gross overreaction, but really to educate and inform and right size it. Now, once they have that information, it's up to them. They need to right size that based on their ministry's needs. There's all kinds of opportunities and great people out there who can help them get an accurate assessment of what's happening, not based on fear, but based on sort of proactive prevention.
As a ministry, are you forced with a decision to either be safe or be welcoming? Or is there a way that you can hold that tension and do both and make the people that come to your ministry feel both taken care of and welcome? That's a question we're going to dive into today with Craig Cable. He serves Lightwell in the states of Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Kansas, and Nebraska, and he does safety trainings for ministries all over the country to help them find a balance between safety and preparedness, and also being the church. Let's get right into our conversation with Craig Cable. Well, it is my sincere pleasure to be joined by Craig Cable. He is from Lightwell, Colorado, also serving the states of North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Kansas. He does safety and security trainings all over that part of the country and everywhere else. Craig, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Adam, man, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. And I know you to be a specialist in the area of safety and security, but I think it's important for people listening to the podcast to know a little bit about your background. Now, I also know that it's so diverse. It's almost like you're the Forrest Gump of safety and security. Like if it happened, you were somehow there and you know about it.
I prefer Swiss Army knife.
Yes,
Adam.
Swiss Army knife is better.
Yeah, Swiss.
It's better. So, but give us a sense of what's your background with safety and security? What leads you up to this point of being a trainer of ministries in this area?
Sure. Yeah, it's diverse. I'll start first with where I serve and how I serve. I am the head of security for a large multi-campus ministry here in northern Colorado. It has 2 campuses, and I lead a team of about 50 volunteers on that team. And I've been part of either serving or leading on that team for over a decade. So my challenges or everyone else's challenges who are trying to do what they can to protect their congregations. I am prior to coming to Lightwell, I was involved with group publishing as a product developer, and I was one of the lead developers in a resource that Brotherhood Mutual and Group Publishing partnered with to develop called the Safe and Secure Church, the Ministry Approach Training Kit. And so I loved getting to work with Brotherhood in that capacity, so much so that I thought, hey, I want to focus my whole career around protecting and serving our churches. And then this other odd hat that I wear, this is a bit of an anomaly for an insurance agent, is I am also a sworn reserve sheriff deputy for the Larimer County Sheriff's Office here in northern Colorado, where I serve as a patrol deputy. And I wear a lot of hats within law enforcement, but probably one of the ones that I really enjoy and am gratified by is that I'm a multidisciplinary trainer, instructor for law enforcement. So I take the best practices of what is available to our law enforcement members and contextualize it to help serve and protect our ministries. So pretty diverse.
Very diverse, very cool. And for what it's worth, thank you so much for all those different hats that you've chosen to put on in the service of others. That's really cool.
You bet.
And I appreciate it. So let's talk about then your training of ministries. How do you approach a ministry to get them to take on security as a priority in their mindset?
Yeah. First, every ministry wants to be a safe and welcoming place. That's a given, right? But I think the issue that we're having, or that I encounter, is that they have a tendency to see the lens through, if it hasn't happened here before, it's likely not to happen. And so I think they kind of go into their world with sort of a flawed assumption. And, the reality is that, any church that has had something really bad hadn't happened there either. And so I think we have a responsibility to our congregations and our communities to do what we can to keep people safe, protect our ministries, but also be reasonable about it. So I think that's the approach I take. And I'd say a lot of my efforts is really around helping ministries understand what are the incidents that are likely to occur, right sizing expectations, and then helping them lessening either preventing the incident from happening or if it is going to happen, lessening the impact of that incident. So um, I think a lot of what I do is just educating and training.
That's so good. And you talked about, lessening the impact. We'll get more into this later, but can you give sort of a real life sense of how security training has helped mitigate what could have been worse in a ministry?
Yeah. I'll give an example from my own church, something that I experienced. We have a special needs ministry that is an amenity to our congregation. So if families have someone who maybe has a special need or is on the spectrum, they can come and worship, and we have qualified professionals in the room to care for those kids. But they come with unique needs. And we had a situation where a child from that room was able to get away from their caregiver in the room and uh, was unaccounted for. So by the time we got the word about it, that this child was on the loose, we immediately went into our emergency safety plan around a lost child incident, and that was only exacerbated or compounded by the unique challenge of a nonverbal special needs child. And so in that our response is as soon as something like that happens, we immediately start closing down the church. We immediately start putting people out in the parking lot. We immediately start sort of these thorough communicated searches of the building while notifying law enforcement. And it just so happened that when I left the building, I caught him running outside around the corner. So not only was he outside of his room, he had made it outside of the building. And had we started our search pattern in the building looking out, we never would have seen him. And so to me, it was only because of our preparation and training and communication with the special needs teams and children's ministry people that we were able to quickly manage the situation before it became worse. Our church is located next to a busy highway and just would have been catastrophic had we not intervened when we had.
That's a great example. And so now you've made this crossover into the insurance world, your background in safety and security and even publishing to support ministries, but now you're doing insurance in support of ministries. How does that aspect add to what you bring to a ministry when you're talking about safety and security? In addition to here's practical training, how does insurance play a part in that conversation?
Well, first, what little boy doesn't grow up saying, I want to grow up to be an insurance agent, right? But yeah, in all fairness, it's amazing how God works, right? I didn't see that coming. That wasn't my plan, but it's amazing how God sort of prepares you for a time such as this. And so I think it brings not only sort of a life experience with me. I've spent most of my life, adult life, serving and resourcing the local church. So I love the church. I feel a huge responsibility to serve the church. And through my experience, firsthand experiences leading a safety team, but also now that I have perspective in the insurance world, my realization was people oftentimes, ministry leaders oftentimes perceive a threat and it's not right sized to what is actually occurring. And if I can give you an example of this, I would say more often than not, when I engage in ministry around developing a safety or security plan, it's not surprising to you, most of their focus is around active shooter prevention. That's where their focus is. And so, but I would call that a high impact incident. There's no doubt about it, but incredibly low probability. In the full completed years of reporting, 22 and 23 and 24, the FBI stat shows that there were two active shooter incidences one in a Christian school, one in a house of worship. Well, when you consider 400,000 churches and Christian schools in the United States, that demonstrates an incredibly low probability. However, a child getting out of your children's ministry room and being tragically injured or killed in traffic, that is actually an incredibly high probability and immeasurable high impact. So a lot of what I do is I bring the world of insurance and understanding the types of claims that ministries file, and I use that as a base of understanding and a proof to demonstrate of why we prioritize the things we do and the importance of stressing those emergency response plans. So to me, I see that they interlace perfectly.
That's excellent. Okay, then when you're beginning that conversation around the insurance part of this with the ministry, in addition to training, what are some often overlooked or maybe misunderstood coverages that churches should make sure they're asking their insurance agent about for their particular plan?
First and foremost, and we put it on all of our policies: security operations, liability endorsement, and traumatic incident. Those are specific coverages that protect those who are protecting your church and obviously protect the ministry, God forbid, if something really, really bad happens. So I find those are fairly ubiquitous on the policies that we write and serve. And I think they see the value in those coverages. I would see the area if where I see underinsured or neglected are in an emerging risk around cyber exposures. So, and I know you've covered this topic before, and so I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but I would say there is a lack of understanding in how sophisticated these attacks are and how disruptive to ministries these attacks will be. And I think there's a belief that these largely focus on large ministries. I have seen incidents occur in small, medium, and large ministries. So I think with the continued advent of uh, artificial intelligence, I think the level of sophistication of those incidents and threats are just exponentially going to grow here. So I would say that's an area that you really want to have a conversation with. So not only physical security and safety best practices, but what are we doing to protect the assets of the ministry as far as people's confidential information? So I would say that's an area of where there's a lot of communication and conversations that need to occur.
That's great. A quick follow up on this, and maybe you've got specific thoughts, maybe you don't, and that's okay. If you were going to tool up a ministry with specific questions about security or the traumatic incident response to make sure they understand what's in their policy, no matter who they're working with, what questions would you empower them with? Like, how can they really excavate and understand what their policy is ready to do?
Well, boy, I think that's a conversation to have with your local agent. I have a huge responsibility not only as to be the guide and consultant for this ministry, but a burden of responsibility that I'm doing everything I can to make sure that I'm staying apprised of emerging threats, of best practices, and that I'm the conduit of that information to come back to the church. So knowing, my colleagues in the world of Lightwell, I know we all take that very seriously. And so if you're only seeing the relationship with your agent in this transactional nature, they cover our property and liability, you are really missing out on the larger benefit of not only the wealth of information and resources they have available to them, but the network of other agents. When you mentioned that I go around the country, I love that I can be a resource for Lightwells from coast to coast. And so if they have questions for me, I field those questions all the time. Yeah, I have a unique competency in these specific areas, but we rely on the strength of the network to help serve our ministries in more meaningful ways. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, no, no, that's great. That's really great. So, this is a perfect segue, actually. You were talking about the things that you host, these events, these trainings. I would love to know, how did this become such a core part of how you equip ministries, these events? And then what's the impact you've seen? How many trainings have you done? How many ministries do you think you've probably at this point touched with these events?
Wow, that's that's a good question. I looked over the last 10 years, I would say it's probably in the thousands of people who've participated in these events or that I've engaged in webinars or calls. Um, but I believe we've only scratched the surface. And so I just found that most people had an unrealistic perception of risk, and they're not experts in this area. So they're experts in ministry, and they need to rely on wise counsel of those who have this expertise. And so I would say the biggest takeaway when I see people come to my events is kind of the broadening of their perspective. And it's referred to as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And you may not know it by that name, but you'll know it by this other, is that it's the concept of unknown unknowns. So you've heard this before, meaning that they know what they know. They may even know what they don't know, but they oftentimes don't know what they don't know. And so my job is not to scare them or elicit a gross overreaction, but really to educate and inform and right size it. Now, once they have that information, it's up to them. They need to right size that based on their ministry's needs. But operating in a world of where there's a lack of responsibility to know, I think that comes with a little bit of a little naive and a little irresponsible. There's all kinds of opportunities and great people out there who can help them get an accurate assessment of what's happening, not based on fear, but based on sort of proactive prevention. And to me, that's why I put on the miles that I do. That's why I give up the hours away from my family that I do because that really matters to me.
Hmm. Excellent. And what would you say the most common light bulbs are that go off during these trainings? Things that go from unknown unknowns to known unknowns. What are those common things where a ministry is like, oh, we should have thought of that, or why didn't we know about that?
Yeah. I think because I broadened their perspective, they had a very narrow view of what could happen. And once again, it's flavored by what has happened or hasn't happened, draws that perspective. So I would say a lot of what comes away with it, there's some best practices that I want to make sure I instill in ministries. But I would say my heavy lift when they come to an event like that is just to accurately represent the world around them and invite them to the problem. I've participated in other events from other trainers like me, and I would say they tend to drive towards more fear-based motivation. I I just haven't found that to be effective, and I'm not sure that's the when you're talking about ministries, I'm not sure that's the best approach. I'm more for empowerment because if I can increase their confidence in something, then I can increase their competency in reacting to it. And so I think that's a lot of what I do is paint a realistic picture, give them practical tools that are going to make a difference next Sunday, because there's no point in pointing out a problem that there's not an easy solution to. Now, some of the world's ills, there's not an easy solution to it, but we know what we're called to do. We know where our mission lives, and there's a way that we can try to balance that.
Hmm. So I think I've heard you say this phrase before. Pardon me if I'm giving you credit for something someone else said, but
I'm I'll
it's
take credit for it if it was
as
amazing.
oh, it's so good. It's an issue of you're not going to rise to the occasion. You're going to fall to the level of your training.
Yeah.
Is that something you've said?
It's a quote I've quoted.
Okay.
It's a Greek warrior philosopher, Archilochus,
Mhm.
who actually said it, but I'll take total credit for it. He's not gonna what is he gonna say?
It's nothing at this point. I love that sentiment because I think there's this heroic impulse inside us all to say,
Right,
if the chips are down, I'm going to show up because I want to, because I want
right,
to do what's right and good and help when people need it. But the truth is, without preparation, without understanding ahead of time, the
right.
likelihood of your ability to rise to the occasion is pretty small. And
Yeah,
so, with that in mind, I'd love to say, you're not going to do an in-person training for everybody that's listening to this podcast, but if someone's listening today, could you give, here's like 3 practical next steps or questions you could answer before your next Sunday gathering to do something small that would help you with your preparation?
yeah. No, great. And kind of giving nod back to Archilochus, being in law enforcement, I'm not operating in theory of what happens when bad things happen. We see it. We see it in trained officers. We see it on the street, and so I have a pretty good snapshot of that. So when I talk about that, the level of training is really important. The one thing that we don't factor is how is your body going to react under extreme stress? And I think we think from a practical standpoint, but we've discounted just the effect of stress in our decision making, our motor skills, and our reaction. Training only overcomes what your body is naturally going to do. And so I'm going to make another plug for that. But to answer your question, yeah, there's I would say three. There's many, but there's three that I really push hard into. And that first one is to formalize and legitimize your safety team. A lot of ministries will say, "Yeah, we don't really have a safety team, but there's Craig and there's Bob and they're good guys and they kind of keep it and they got guns and they're going to keep us safe." And I would say that's not only a disservice to your ministry, but it's really a disservice to those guys because they're not adequately equipped or delegated with the appropriate amount of authority to make good decisions on behalf of the ministry. So if they haven't dedicated in their training and prevention and incident response, it just opens up way too much of opportunities for things to go wildly wrong. So that's the first one. Second one is right size your training around the incidents most likely to occur. I've already sort of talked about that. This disproportionate focus on active shooter response. I get it. It's terrifying to think that that could happen, and so we have a tendency to lean that way. But using my example from my own church, Most churches I encounter when I ask them what their lost child or missing child response protocol is, stare blankly at me and said, I don't know. I guess we'll just start calling each other and we try to find them. And when you have a lost child, especially one out of the building, time is of the essence. And so developing your plan on the fly for a missing child is just not going to not work to your advantage. And to give you a perspective, not to steer people away from my church, but we've had our share of them. I think over the last 10 years, I think we've had 5 kids not be where they're supposed to be. And it was because of our plans and preparation that we had very positive outcomes on that. And then I think the last one is be very clear of what the role of safety team is. I think that I just was presenting last week at an event where there was a belief that, or a misperception, that you can use whatever level of force necessary to remove someone from the ministry if they're being disruptive. Now, in my state of Colorado, that's called assault. And so, if people are threatened, or if there's a risk of serious bodily injury or death or injury of other people, then a reasonable and practical response would be to use some level of force, hands, whatever it is, to keep people safe. But disrupting your service and being a general nuisance is not one of them. But they operate on a belief that they've been given some authority, like a bouncer. And that to me is a huge risk to the church because of a lack of understanding and training and an understanding of what the laws that are extended to private property afford and what they don't afford. And so to me, having education, knowledge, and training is really paramount to making sure that those serving on the team and that you have the right people serving on your team with the right temperament and attitudes and focus is what helps really protect the ministry long term. And so I would say those are areas where I spend a lot of time helping ministries sort of focus in those areas.
Those are some really good next steps. And I hope that if a ministry leader is listening, they've taken some notes there because it feels like there's things they can do without hiring another person, without having to wait for one of your trainings. There's things that they can do to just open their eyes a little bit wider to the
Yeah.
realities around them and what they can do. So let's talk about what's going on in the church as far as you can see. Are there trends in this area? Do you feel like, unfortunately, because of all the headlines and the things that have happened in churches, that churches are getting more proactive related to their security risks, or are they remaining pretty reactive? Like, are they just waiting and hoping nothing bad happens and hoping that they rise to the occasion? Is it getting better?
I would say yes. Yeah, I mean, just I remember when I first got involved, it was just literally a price 6 to 8 months
Wow.
before Sutherland Springs. And the concept of a church safety team just really didn't exist. I mean, it maybe did in an informal basis, but you have this event, and I think what it did was it caused the church to say, if it can happen in a small South Texas town, it can happen anywhere. And so the pendulum swung. And then we went into this sort of reactionary, sort of overzealous reactionary response that was probably not prudent or ministry focused. And so the pendulum is swinging back more to a moderate level that really people, I would say, positively are legitimizing more teams. They're asking for more opportunities. I had more meaningful conversations today than I did 5 years ago, where it's much more practical and much more actionable than, hey, we're thinking of developing a safety team. I actually don't have that conversation anymore. Where 10 years ago, that was the only conversation I had. So I would say they're now asking, how do we make it better? How do we keep up with the trends that we're seeing? And that's I would say that's very, very positive.
That's very encouraging to hear. We talked before on this podcast about this sense of balance, and I'd love to hear how you articulate this sense of balance between being a safe place and having a vigilant mind for making sure that everybody that comes through the door is protected and taken care of as a top priority, and also being a place of welcome
Yeah.
where anyone can feel like that is their place and it belongs to them and they belong there. How do you encourage ministries to hold that tension between those two things?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a perfect word to describe it, Adam. It's a tension. While we could make for very safe churches that have metal detectors, pat downs, barbed wire, restrict who attends, it would cease to be the church. And so for us to continue to have missional communities serving people in their best of times and their worst of times, to be available to the community at large, we have to manage this tension between bad things sometimes happen. You can't prevent everything. You just sort of manage it as best you can and mitigate it as much as you can. But I would say a good way to start, and how I advise churches are, start with your ministry and mission focus first, and then develop safety and security best practices that align with that mission. I'll give you an example. A church out in the middle of nowhere who hasn't really, they see a few new people, they're going to have a different safety and security posture potentially than a ministry that's in an urban area that has a heart and a call to serve the homeless community. Very different risk exposures, but they both have to have their plans. I love serving and working with both. They're on either end of the spectrum. Can bad things happen there? Yeah, someone could have a heart attack at this little country church, and you're going to have to manage. What do you do with the family members in the midst of this crisis? Do you have medical resources there to provide a level of care until you get a higher level of care there? That's very real and very plausible on a Sunday morning in that church. It's also very plausible for an urban ministry to have someone who's potentially under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or is in some type of mental crisis that has a different impact. Both can happen on any given Sunday. And so I think it needs to be proportional. It needs to be informed. And I think we just need to have a conversation about it. And so, but losing sight of why we're gathering and our mission to serve the community. I mean, I think the Bible says it best when it says, we're the bride and we will prevail against the gates of hell. And so rely on people who are informed and experts in these areas to give us good, sound practices that don't distract from our ministry focus, but actually complement the ways. And the truth is, people expect that now. The public's perception of the expectation of being able to gather safely is very different today than it was 10 years ago. And so now we not only have a responsibility, a missional responsibility, but I believe we have a congregational responsibility. And for ministries that have a safety presence or sound safety plans, I find it's actually attractional. People want to bring their families and kids to a church that has their act together versus the other. So I think it's good on all fronts.
Yeah, because if you can create an environment that's welcoming, but welcoming based on the premise that you will be safe when you're here, that safety communicates care, and it can actually engender a really strong sense of belonging because you feel cared for by the safety of the place. I really
Yeah,
like that shift from the idea of safety means we have to be paranoid and push everyone away. Instead, it
right.
can be an inviting thing, which is a really cool switch. And I think that there's another thing, and you just kind of said this, but there's a continuum here. There's not one way to view safety and security. And so, yes, aligning it with your mission and vision and values, but I think the idea of leaning on a trusted advisor, someone
Right.
that knows insurance and knows safety and security, that's not maybe a member of your church, is a really good way to make sure that you're doing this in a wise way. Not just trying to cook up a plan inside your walls, but asking someone on the outside, how does this line up with what other churches are doing? How does this stack up to what is or is not included in my insurance policy? These are questions that it doesn't have to be a Lightwell Insurance Advisor. You should ask any independent agent in your area these hard questions and make sure they give you answers that make your ministry feel supported in the ways they want to serve, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said, Adam.
I don't know. I'm answering my own questions now so I can
You're
sound
amazing.
smart. Thank you. I really appreciate you watching me interview
Yeah.
myself for a
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, is there anything else in this area that we haven't yet talked about today that you think is relevant or pertinent? I don't want to miss anything now that we've got you on the podcast. Anything else?
Yeah, I would just say have a conversation. A concern that early on what I heard is that a concern that if there was a security presence, that it would create a concern for members of the church to say there must be a threat. I think we moved past that. I think to your point earlier that hey, people see that as a commitment to their family's welfare and well being, and so I get that. but it's not static. And I think that would be, if I was to leave them with a parting thought, was that this is a dynamic situation, that as situations evolve, as ministry needs evolve, as best practices evolve, this is a conversation that should happen frequently. And it's important that you seek wise counsel, not only with trusted advisors within the ministry who have the ministry's best interest at heart, but also, like you said, consulting people who, I mean, I live and breathe church safety and security. That's what I do. It's my passion. And then I have a responsibility to hold that hat. They don't have to. They get to love and serve and care for people in ways that they should. And so I think continue the conversation, seek wise counsel, and just continue to just be the church. That we don't operate in a world of fear, and that we continue to push forward and lean forward and follow where God is going and be faithful to that, and then invite people along that help us get there. And so that's it. But I love it. I love that I get to be here. I love that I get to partner with folks like you, Adam. I love the ways you communicate to churches around these very specific needs, and it's such a privilege to be a part of all this.
Craig Cable, Lightwell in Colorado, serving the states of North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, and training everywhere else. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. God bless.
My thanks once again to Craig Cable and his expertise in this area of ministry safety and security. A couple of takeaways. One, there are things you can do right away to make next Sunday more safe and secure at your ministry. So listen back through that, take notes, empower the people in your ministry, formalize the team, let them know that you have their back the way they're trying to have your back. Also, don't do it alone. Meet with your insurance agent now, or contact lightwell.com and reach out to an advisor in your area to ask some questions. Expand your viewpoint of ministry safety and security for your specific ministry. And until the next episode of the podcast, let's go and let it shine.